Under the blistering glare of the Afghan sun, dust swirled across the barren compound, clinging to uniforms, seeping into mouths, grinding against teeth. A group of U.S. Navy SEALs had gathered in silence, their presence commanding, their very stillness carrying the weight of authority. And then there was her, alone, smaller in stature, her uniform stained with sweat and grit, her boots scuffed from endless marches. She stood rigidly at attention, her eyes fixed straight ahead, though every muscle in her body trembled with exhaustion. The SEAL chief stepped forward, his shadow cutting across the ground toward her. His face was unreadable, hardened by years of battle and loss, the kind of face carved not by age, but by decisions no human should ever have to make. He stopped barely a foot away, his stare unrelenting, as though trying to read her very soul. His voice was sharp, low, yet it pierced the tense silence like a blade. "What's your name?" The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The SEALs behind him exchanged glances, their hardened expressions betraying a flicker of curiosity. They had seen many stand before the chief, but none with her presence. Dust clung to her eyelashes, sweat carved lines through the grime on her face, yet she didn't flinch. Slowly she raised her chin, her eyes locking with his. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight no one expected. "My name," she said, steady as steel, "is the name of the man who died covering me." The chief's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked in his cheek. The words struck him harder than a bullet, sharper than shrapnel. His breath caught in his chest, frozen by the sudden realization of the weight she carried in silence. The compound around them seemed to vanish into stillness, as though the earth itself demanded respect for what had just been spoken. No one moved, no one spoke. Her backstory unfolded like scars etched beneath her skin. She had been a combat medic, deployed alongside Marines in some of the deadliest valleys of Afghanistan. She remembered the metallic stench of blood mingling with gunpowder, the sound of mortars thundering through the night, the choking dust that coated her throat until every swallow burned. She had saved lives with trembling hands, holding tourniquets tight while rounds snapped overhead, whispering promises she couldn't always keep to the men fading beneath her grip. But there was one moment she could never escape, one man whose memory followed her like a ghost, Sergeant Mark Halden, the one who had refused cover, who had turned back when everyone else screamed at him to run. He had thrown himself into the open to shield her from a hail of gunfire, his body collapsing onto hers with a grunt she still felt in her chest when she closed her eyes. His blood had soaked her uniform, hot and heavy. His last words rasped into her ear, "Live, carry me with you," and she had. Every step, every breath since that day was borrowed time she owed to him. When she enlisted again, when she stood in lines of scrutiny, when others dismissed her strength because she was smaller, softer, quieter, she bore his name inside her like armor. It was not just a memory, it was a vow. Now here she was, standing before the SEAL chief, a man who had seen countless warriors broken and rebuilt, a man who thought he knew every kind of soldier. Yet she had just silenced him with nothing more than truth. Around them, the weight of injustice lingered. Some in the compound had doubted her presence. Some had whispered that she didn't belong, that her scars were invisible, that her silence meant weakness. She had felt their eyes on her, their smirks when she stumbled from exhaustion, the dismissive tone in their questions. She bore it all in silence, refusing to waste words on defense. Her dignity was her shield, her silence her rebellion. And yet disrespect had been relentless. The chief's question was not meant as cruelty, but as a test. Who was she to stand among them? What name could she possibly carry that would demand their respect? Her answer cut through those doubts like lightning. In the stillness that followed, the chief's mind raced. He had led men through jungles and deserts, watched brothers die in his arms, buried friends without tears because there was no time for mourning. But her words reached into a place he had buried long ago, a place of guilt, of memory, of every man he had left behind. He saw her not as a medic, not as a soldier, but as a living monument to sacrifice. The tension grew heavier. Some of the men shifted uneasily, ashamed of their earlier doubts. Their silence spoke volumes. They knew what she carried was heavier than any rucksack, any weapon. She bore the weight of a life given for hers. The disrespect, the whispers, the silent judgment, none of it mattered now. In that moment, her quiet defiance became undeniable. She was no longer just a woman standing in the dirt. She was the embodiment of every unspoken oath, every sacrifice unacknowledged. The chief took a step back. His voice, when it finally emerged, was rough, almost broken. "Then you carry more than any of us." A quote that would be remembered, shared, repeated. But she didn't respond. She stood silently, her gaze unwavering, as though to say, "This is not about me, this is about him." The power shift was complete. No argument, no shouting, no fight. Just silence, an honor that demanded recognition. The SEALs who had doubted her now lowered their eyes, some straightening their stance, some swallowing the shame of their own arrogance. And then slowly, one by one, they moved. Boots scuffed against the dirt, as men who had once stood in silent doubt now stood in silent respect. A ripple spread through the compound. The chief himself raised his hand in salute, crisp and unwavering. For the first time since she had spoken, emotion flickered across her face, a single tear tracing the dust on her cheek. The climax arrived not in violence, but in unity. A compound that had once been divided now stood as one, bound by respect for the unseen battles she carried. Her silence had triumphed over doubt. Her quiet strength had shattered their arrogance. The chief's final words lingered like an oath. "Heroes don't speak of sacrifice. They live it. And you—" His voice faltered, but he pressed on, steady now. "You remind us why we fight." She did not need to answer. Her presence was the answer. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground, but the silence remained sacred, heavy with meaning. A woman who had been judged, dismissed, underestimated, had just reminded them all of the cost of their uniforms. As the compound slowly returned to life, the respect remained. Whispers no longer carried doubt. They carried reverence. Her story would not be forgotten, and in the hearts of those who witnessed it, a truth settled like stone. Silent dignity carries more power than any weapon. The story lingered not just in that compound, but in the memory of everyone who heard it. A reminder that strength is not always loud, that honor does not need to be declared, and that the greatest warriors are often those who bear the heaviest losses in silence. Viewers were left with a question echoing in their own minds. How many silent heroes walk among us, unseen, unacknowledged, carrying names we may never know? If you are hearing this story now, pause and reflect. Respect is not owed to rank, to medals, or to noise. It is owed to the unseen battles, the quiet strength, the sacrifices carried in silence. Share your thoughts below. Tell us where you're listening from, and if stories like this move you, stand with us. Subscribe and carry these heroes with you, because some names may never be etched in stone, but they live forever in those who choose to remember.